Hello.
Welcome back to the Space Gulag. Today we're going to find out what happened had Anakin Skywalker been executed by his own men. Before we begin, this special thanks to our patrons, and if you want to check out the podcast, Twitch, or any of the other things, all links are down below. Otherwise, our story begins inside of the Chancellor's office. Mace Windu had just been shot out of the window, and Anakin Skywalker had just pledged his allegiance to the Sith Lord. Sidious' instructions for Anakin were to go to the Jedi Temple, wipe them all out, show no mercy, and do not hesitate. Skywalker understood his mission statement, and so he bowed to his master and left the Chancellor's office, making his way back to the Jedi Temple. Anakin raised his robes over his head, walking past the clone troopers that had been drawn to the sound of the conflict inside of Palpatine's office. Palpatine immediately got to work, listing off all the clones and beginning the issue of orders out to commanders and captains galaxy-wide. The first one was Commander Appo of the 501st. He was on Coruscant and his mission was to attack the Jedi Temple with Anakin Skywalker. He would need to be ready upon Skywalker's arrival to the Jedi Temple. When Appo answered the call, he took the orders in and began rallying up the troops. As Sidious gave the orders out, Commander Fox and a few other men of the Coruscant Guard walked in. They all overheard the order and their minds switched up. Their first reaction was to ask if Palpatine was alright, to which Palpatine admitted he was. He was excited about the opportunity to wipe out the Jedi. Commander Fox nodded his head and told his men to fan out and find the Jedi that were present inside the building. Sidious looked up at Fox a little confusedly for a moment, and then he went back to what he was doing. Sidious simply assumed that there were other Jedi inside the temple, maybe waiting for Master Windu or just aiding senators, so in his mind it wasn't that big of a deal. Palpatine was ensured by the Kaminoans that Anakin Skywalker was to be excluded from the list of Jedi. Of course, Lama Su wasn't exactly too caring about it, and so the name that was put into the inhibitor chip database was a slight typo, Anakin Starkiller. Tragic, but the truth that Sidious yet had learned about. Sidious continued issuing out orders to have the Jedi executed for high treason against the Galactic Republic. Palpatine immediately went for the Jedi closest to Skywalker to ensure their immediate deaths. Commander Rex and Commander Cody were the two next in line, and then Sidious went for the members of the Jedi Council and Ki-Adi-Mundi, Plo Koon, and Master Yoda, as well as the rest of them. Sidious was so enthralled with his plan finally coming to fruition. On the other hand, Skywalker was flying across the city of Coruscant towards the Jedi Temple. As he got closer to the stairs leading up into the temple, he saw the members of the 501st gathered up. They were all standing side by side. They were all in formation, ready to do this. Anakin had some second thoughts as he landed his vessel. His heart was beating out of his chest, and he was really questioning if he could go through with this. He got out of his ship and got down to the little platform, and then started walking around the corner of the building, and he saw his men. He needed to do this for Padme. Skywalker picked up pace as he started walking closer and closer to his men. Commander Appo turned his head and noticed Skywalker making his way towards them. Appo panicked as he lifted his blaster and fired. Anakin noticed this and moved out of the way, as the rest of the clones began to turn and fire at Skywalker. Anakin may have been very talented as a duelist, but he was no match for the combined blaster fire of the 501st. Anakin blocked as many shots as he could, but he fell back, damaged by the shots, and then toppled over, as the clones came in and began firing onto his back, kicking his body to make sure that he was dead. Inside the Jedi Temple, the current master of the temple, Sindralik, heard the noise of blaster fire. Typically, there wasn't any blaster fire outside of the temple, but the amount of blaster fire that was heard sounded like an army. He immediately went to the front of the temple and ran to the steps. He looked down. It was dark out, but he could see and hear the chatter of clones, and then Sindralik saw Anakin Skywalker's dead body. Sindralik didn't know what happened to Windu, Fisto, Kolar, or Tin, but it was his responsibility to protect the Jedi Temple, and so immediately he ran back inside the Jedi Temple and shut down the entire facility. He sounded an alarm that woke up the knights, guards, and masters present inside the building. All the younglings were taken away to a safe location inside the Jedi Temple, close to transportation, so that they could escape if they needed to. Sindralik alerted one of the few council members present that the temple was going into high alert. Jedi Master Chak Ti rose to her feet and made her way over to the front of the temple. She gathered up with Master Oppo Rensis and Coleman Kaj, as they both alerted her that the 501st turned on Anakin Skywalker. When the sounds of the alarms echoed down to the clones below, they were immediately alerted that the Jedi knew of their presence, and so the clones began the charge up the steps of the Jedi Temple. Master Sindralik had preparation for this. It was passed down from Jedi to Jedi in his position, and it was an automatic system defense inside of the Jedi Temple. It was installed after the Jedi recaptured the Jedi Temple from the Sith eons ago. The clones got up to the top layer and they saw that the temple had been closed off, and so they kept running, and then Sindralik activated the temple's defenses as they got to the top. The stairs leading into the temple slid back into a barrier, creating a 90-degree drop that would lead the troopers still running up the steps to fall about 100 meters, or a simple translation to a 30-story drop, to their deaths. All the clones on the steps were high enough up that when the stairs dropped out from under them, they were to fall to their immediate death. The clones cried out as the men in the back of the line looked back to see their brothers falling to their deaths. That wasn't the end of the pain, though. There were kyber crystals installed inside of each of the pillars leading up into the interior of the Jedi Temple entrance, and they too were activated, unleashing an array of lasers that began cutting through the clone troopers that charged the Jedi Temple. They all cried out in pain as they tried to stop and avoid the lasers, but the lasers began to move. These lasers were essentially extra-large lightsabers inside of the walls, and the clones cried out as they tried to escape. Some of the men pulled out of their thermal detonators, but by the time they activated their detonators, or through them, they had sealed their own fate, as several of the clone troopers ended up killing their own brothers with the thermal detonators. This was an execution. The Jedi Temple was highly defended, and the few men who survived this far were terrified. They couldn't go anywhere, and so they called for reinforcements from the Coruscant Guard. Jedi Master Sindralik heard the communication go out, and so he turned off the Jedi Temple defenses and allowed the clones to gather up on the main platform. It would simply look like the clones weren't able to enter their defenses. Because the Coruscant Guard was simply a police force, they weren't trained with the same precision as the 501st in active combat experience, and so here in this moment, they'd have to prove their mettle. While yes, the Coruscant Guard had the same training as the 501st, they didn't see the same combat that the 501st did. The Coruscant Guard wasn't present during either battles of Geonosis, they weren't at Christophsis, Umbara, or even Anaxis for that matter. And that was the difference. The real experience that the 501st has was much more valuable to them than to the Coruscant Guard, who had none of that. The simulated experience that the Coruscant Guard had wouldn't amount to what the 501st had gone through. Within 30 minutes, LAATs land down on top of the Jedi Temple, and the clones from the Coruscant Guard exited as Commander Fox informed the few survivors of the 501st that he'd be taking over effective immediately. The clones nodded their heads as Fox moved forward and ordered his men in position for breaching exercises, but alas, that wouldn't be worth it. As the clones got to the barricades, they were electrified, and the clones that either touched it or set explosives on it were blown half to hell. The clones who saw it looked at each other, and before they could react, the pillars were reignited, and the clones again were cut into pieces, slain by their inability to learn from the mistakes of the 501st. A few dozen of the clones survived, but the trauma remained as they sat quietly, hidden, though instead of trying to understand that the Jedi were simply protecting themselves, they wanted revenge, and when the lasers turned off, they prepared for a final stand with the Jedi. A couple of temple guards alongside Master Sindralik came out to take the survivors in, have them surrender, and understand what this was all about, but a few dozen of the clones saw this as an opportunity and shot at the Jedi, clipping Master Sindralik, though before a single Jedi could be slain, the survivors of the massacre were slaughtered. With the majority of the clones on Coruscant killed in action, Palpatine would have to wait until another available unit of clones could strike against the temple. He had some star cruisers that could bombard the temple, but the truth is, the Jedi Temple was too highly defended. It would have been much easier just to have Anakin kill Jedi after he went to Mustafar and wipe out the Separatist government, because it would have kept Anakin off of Coruscant and allowed for Palpatine to frame Padme's death on the Jedi. But that wasn't the case. It's the reason why he made Anakin attack the temple in a frontal assault, because the temple was guarded with heavy steel that wouldn't melt under the power of a bombardment. Hence, Palpatine made the clones march on the temple in this catastrophic ruse. The Jedi Masters inside the temple had been contacting Jedi across the galaxy, trying to see who had survived. Some of them were able to locate lost Padawans and direct them to where they should go, whereas Masters were instructed to return to Coruscant. The Padawans were sent to Tython so that they could find refuge in the former homeworld of the Jedi. It'd be safe for them there, because there were no clone outposts in that area. Coruscant was too highly defended for a Padawan to navigate. Two survivors of the Jedi Council made their way back to Coruscant immediately, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Master Yoda. When they arrived, eventually, they were informed of what had happened. Obi-Wan was truly saddened to hear of Skywalker's death. It broke his heart, though he realized that now it wasn't time to lament his student's death. That would come after the death of the Sith. The Jedi would send Shakti, Coleman Kaj, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Sindralik, and Master Yoda to the Senate building to face down Darth Sidious. If they could get there and destroy him, they'd be one step closer to confirming victory for the Republic. Of course, with General Grievous dead, there was already victory on the horizon, but they needed to destroy Sidious now, before they did anything else. It was the early morning when the two Jedi arrived, and when they arrived at the Senate building. Palpatine hadn't had time to dissolve the Senate or the Galactic Republic. He'd only had time to execute Order 66, though in the later part of the evening, Palpatine planned on bringing the Senate together so that he could crown himself as Emperor of the Galaxy. His plan was close to being complete. Currently, Palpatine was bringing the Wolf Pack and the Galactic Marines back to Coruscant so that they could destroy the Jedi Temple and raid it, killing all the members inside. But when the Jedi arrived inside of Palpatine's office, he panicked. Sidious would have tried to run had just Master Yoda showed up, but this was 5 Jedi Masters alongside Yoda. It wasn't that Palpatine couldn't fight them all. He definitely could, but it had been less than 12 hours since he had his face redone by Master Windu. Sidious ignited his lightsaber and moved in to intercept the Jedi so that he could make a daring escape. Though before he could, Yoda used the Force to throw Sidious from the air into a corresponding wall. Sidious flew through the wall as the Jedi all ignited their weapons, and moved on the Sith Lord, following Yoda first. Of course. Though when they looked into the hole, Sidious had vanished. His evil cackling could be heard echoing down the hallway. Palpatine's guard came running in. Coleman and Shaak Ti told the other 3 Jedi to go as they turned to the guard and began fighting them back, attempting to not kill them in the process, though having to turn to killing them because of their inability to see the peace in resolution. Yoda led a Kenobi and Sindralic down the hole Palpatine fell into, which led them to a landing platform. Out on the landing platform there were more guards. Kenobi told the other 2 Jedi to keep going as he ignited his lightsaber once again and blocked the guards as Yoda and Sindralic chased down Sidious. Sidious leapt into the air, shooting electricity at a pilot stepping towards a small fighter vessel. The electricity fried the pilot in pain as Sidious landed, jumping into the vessel, turning on the engines, and blasting off. By the time Yoda landed behind him, the ship was too far gone for him to latch onto with the Force. Kenobi continued moving around as he cut down the final guards, only to see Sidious's fighter blasting off into space. The Jedi rallied together and agreed they needed to inform the Senate that Palpatine was behind everything. He was a Sith Lord and he was an enemy of the Republic. He was the one who started the Naboo crisis 10 years before. With the lack of clones on Coruscant for the next several hours, the Jedi reached out to every single senator and informed them of Palpatine's treachery and how he had betrayed the Republic. The senators were in disbelief, but when he was nowhere to be found, they couldn't deny the Jedi's accusations. Though there was something working against the Jedi in this situation. They had destroyed nearly 2 entire legions of clones on the steps of the Jedi Temple. Of course, the senators and the Jedi hadn't found out yet that the other half of the Coruscant Guard and the 501st were killed in a crash landing of a Venator in an attempt to kill Ahsoka Tano. The only thing the Jedi had as evidence was the deaths of the Jedi Masters, the execution of Order 66, and the Jedi gathered outside the steps of the Jedi Temple, and the execution of Anakin Skywalker. No one knew that Skywalker pledged himself to Sidious. All they could tell is that he was going to his legion before they shot him down. To Obi-Wan, he saw his student as a hero for trying to talk to his men before they killed him in cold blood. Though the Senate uncovered the holo recordings from the previous night, most of which had been edited and fixed by Palpatine to make the Jedi sound as bad as possible, which it did, though no one could admit that they really agreed with Palpatine calling himself the Senate. While the Senate was in discussions about who the real culprit was, the Wolf Pack and the Galactic Marines made their way back to Coruscant. Palpatine was on Mustafar. He was assuming full control of the Separatist military and taking all of the available resources at his disposal and reigniting the flame of the Clone War. The droids still had superior numbers this late into the war, but the only issue was the fact that the droid armies had essentially been losing intentionally to make Palpatine look good. Now that was all ruined because some Kaminoan made a typo 13 years before. Palpatine also knew that he could just storm the galaxy and take power for himself, the true Sith way. He knew that with the Jedi surviving, they would reveal that he was behind everything. But after Order 66, the entire dynamic between clone troopers and the Jedi would change. Even if the Senate revoked Order 66, it would still make their dynamic awkward. It could force the Jedi out of the war, or it could force the clones out of the war. Either way, it would be a positive effect for the Separatist war effort. Palpatine's plan was perfect to a T, and now he had to redo his efforts to ensure he found himself victory because a sleazy Kaminoan couldn't type in a name correctly. The Senate was discombobulated, and without Padme present because of the birth of her 2 children in a Republic medical facility, the lean of the Republic was to force the Jedi out of the Republic and allow the clones to fight the rest of the war alone. Though the only convincing reason against that is that the Jedi could hunt down and defeat Sidious, and then end the war because it could simply come to resolve, being that it seemed if Dooku was Sidious's apprentice, then the sole reason reason every attempt to find peace failed was because both sides of the pedestal were actively working to keep the war going, which was good for arms dealers but bad for constituents of each corresponding senator in the Republic and the CIS. So, in a final vote on the Senate floor at the end of a 2-day discussion, after the Senate order of the Wolf Pack and the Galactic Marines to remain steadfast until orders were given by the Republic, the vote would come in to a head. The vote resulting in the Jedi being allowed to serve with the clones until the Sith were defeated. Afterwards, the Senate would reconvene and discuss what would happen next. The Senate would also vote into power a temporary chancellor until they could finish the war. The senator named Ang, who was a senator from the planet Aroma, would be elected into this position. He had a very likable following, and he was often allied himself with the senators like Bail Organa and Mon Mothma, and even Padme Amidala, but he was very well liked on both sides of the aisle. The Senate would follow under interim Chancellor Ang until the end of the war. At the same time, the Senate would be informed by Holly Bartani that the clone army had been implanted with inhibitor chips. The Senate would request that the clones have their inhibitor chips removed at the possible cost of having someone turn the clones against the Senate. This was something Palpatine had originally planned on doing if the Senate didn't side with him, but he was discovered by the Jedi before he could actually activate it. In the meantime, the Jedi would have to discuss their pairings with the clone legions. There was a bit of tension and awkwardness at the idea of working with the same beings who actively tried to kill them. Of course, the Jedi didn't hold revenge or even seek it, but the fact that their men all tried to kill them was alarming. With an inhibitor chip removal, it seemed like there was going to be a level of trustability with the clones, but it was still hard. The Padawans sent the Tython would return to the Jedi Temple, and they wouldn't feel the desire to leave. This included Jedis like Cal Kestis and Caleb Doom. They had lost their masters, and that would forever change their dynamic in training. There was also something else. Obi-Wan was with Padme when she gave birth to Luke and Leia, and he was worried about Palpatine hunting down and finding the children. The Sith Lord was clever. It's not like he wouldn't have known about the children. The thought of Palpatine getting his hand on the Skywalker children was terrifying, and so the Jedi told Padme that she could allow the Jedi to protect the children inside the temple, and then, per her decision, they could give her the children back, or she could raise them inside the temple, up to her. Originally, Padme wasn't on board with any of this, but the truth is, she knew she couldn't defend herself or her children from the Sith Lord. She was brave and strong, but that was outside of her fighting range. At the same time, Commander Rex and Ahsoka Tano would be brought back to the temple. Ahsoka would learn of Anakin's death, and while she wouldn't want to join the Jedi Order, she would serve alongside the Jedi until everything was resolved in the war. Commander Rex would be devastated to learn that his entire legion had been destroyed. The destruction of the 501st was a terrible pain for him, but he would be given the opportunity to serve with Kenobi until the end of the war. Obi-Wan decided he would continue to serve with the 212th. Even though they tried to kill him, Obi-Wan didn't have a hard time with it because he didn't have to see them when they tried to kill him. Sure, he overheard them talking about his death, but he never actually had to kill one of those clones. He never had to turn on them as they did him. Ahsoka would join Obi-Wan in the 212th, and they would serve together. The Jedi began sending out scouts looking for the Sith. This included Yoda, Shakti, Coleman Kaj, and Opa Rancis, and they would all go out to the corresponding Sith worlds looking for the Sith Lord. They searched Korriban, Kryus II, and the multitude of others before discovering writings on a Sith temple on Malachor leading them to Mustafar. During this period of time, the Clone Wars jumped back into full steam. It no longer looked like a winnable war. It looked like a war that would continue for another 3 years. The Separatists slapped back with millions of battle droids. Of course, in space combat, the Separatists were at a disadvantage because of the new, improved Republic Star Destroyer. These vessels were double the size of the Venator, and they carried more weapons and less carrier space. The Republic Star Destroyer was a warship, whereas the Venator was a carrier, even though it played a role of the ship of the line. Regardless, every space battle after Order 66 would be much more winnable for the Republic. This was because the main frontal fleets were equipped with 1 to 3 Republic Star Destroyers. Not even 2 or 3 of the largest ships in the Separatist fleet could handle one of these Star Destroyers alone, let alone a full support fleet with fighters and bombers aiding it. On the ground, it was a bit different. At this point in the war, the clone forces were running a bit thin. Of course, there were still clones from Kamino being pumped out, but there were less and less of them each time they got released. The Kaminoans assumed the war would have been over by now, though they wouldn't have liked the outcome of the war ending under Palpatine. But the clones weren't able to receive reinforcements in the same manner that the Separatists could. The stresses of war were getting to the clones, but nothing got to the clones more than having to live with the execution of Order 66. There were some clones who didn't care. Most of the clones did care though, because not every Jedi was like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. Of course, there were Jedi that the clones struggled with losing. For those clones of the Wolf Pack, they struggled to fight without Plo Koon. He was a Jedi who told them that he valued them before his own life. As a soldier on the front lines, it was relieving that a Jedi general would rather save your life than their own. It was the first real value that clones at all, especially the Wolfpack, felt. It was something said by Plo Koon early in the war, and it was something that was never really directly communicated to them before the war in Kamino. For the clones of the 212 who had their Jedi General return to them alive, they felt ashamed. A lot of the clones couldn't even look at Obi-Wan. They felt terrible what happened. It was a shock, a disappointment, and a true sadness that resonated in each of their hearts about what they had tried to do to Obi-Wan. Sure, they knew it wasn't their fault, but Kenobi showed them nothing but love and respect when returning to their ranks. Even Commander Cody couldn't look at Obi-Wan. Cody was typically a clone who took his helmet off, but after Order 66, he couldn't, and he didn't, especially when Kenobi was near. He was ashamed. It was his friend that he tried to kill. Kenobi was his brother on the battlefront, as close to him as one of his other clone brothers, and he gave the order to try and kill him. Of course, these feelings that Cody felt weren't the same as clones like Bakura, but for clones like Bakura, who was an absolute psycho, it was a bit different. Bakura and Mundi got along really well because they were both simply maniacs, so that was fine. But not all clones felt that same shame. Some of them were even happy because when the Senate removed their inhibitor chips, some of them didn't even have to serve with Jedi anymore. So the feeling of resentment towards their particular Jedi general didn't return because they killed them and no longer had to serve with a Jedi. It was a divisive topic for the clones, definitely, especially as they talked with each other about it. Many of them wished their orders never came through. Some of them didn't really care, while others were ecstatic because it showed the Jedi that they could fear the clones, and they should, and the possibility of them even being betrayed by the clones. But for the clones with decent Jedi generals, they had no real reason to think that the Jedi would ever betray them or treat them badly. It was rough, and that inner turmoil for the clones came through on the battlefront. Kenobi was already on the front lines as a general, but just like Skywalker, he saw the worst of the war, and so did his men. But without Anakin, or even the entire 501st, the 212th was elevated to the sole front-line battalion sent first to the worst of the worst battlefronts. Of course, there weren't many planets left for the Republic to capture before they won the war, but these planets were littered to the brim with battle droids. On the other hand, the 4 Jedi that traveled to Mustafar came across the Sith Lord and the Separatist Council. Though when the Jedi arrived, Sidious executed the entire Separatist Council, he was ready this time. He ignited his lightsaber and lunged towards Oppo Rancice. Sure, Jedi Master Oppo Rancice in his old age looked like an easy target, but he wasn't. He was fast. Coleman Kaj backed up as Shaak Ti moved in next to him. Yoda leapt forward as well. Sidious used a forbidden technique as he dropped his lightsaber out of his hand and caught it in his other. Sidious struck down Coleman Kaj, who had no real defense for Sidious's fast movement. Shaak Ti doubled back as Oppo Rancice doubled forward. The Jedi moved back and forth in unison as Yoda leapt onto a table and struck at Sidious. The Dark Lord ducked backwards and kicked Oppo Rancice in the face. Sidious jabbed forward, catching Oppo's tail as he cried out in pain. Sidious then tried striking for Oppo's chest, but was kicked in the back by Shaak Ti. Yoda leapt over onto Shaak Ti's shoulder as the 2 Jedi moved in union, striking, parrying, and defending each other. Yoda jumped off of her shoulder and used this moment to throw Sidious from his feet and out the door. The Sith Lord growled as he got to his feet. When he looked up, he saw Oppo's tail swinging for him as it collided with his neck. Sidious was thrown off by this as he jolted forward, only to have his lightsaber cut out of his hand by Shaak Ti, and before he could do anything, Yoda used the Force to throw Sidious off the railing and down into the lava river below, to which was the last ever seen of Sidious, which was the screaming of his terror and pain. Though the Jedi weren't done, they turned around and ran back in. They had to turn off the droids across the galaxy, and so the order was given. They would send out the executive command order to shut down all droids of the droid armies. For the clones and Jedi on the front lines, it would be remarkable, and it would be a sign of the end of the Clone War. The Jedi would immediately report the end of the Clone Wars to the Galactic Republic to inform them that peace had begun. Of course, it hadn't. There was a criminal empire rising in the Outer Rim, and so the Senate had discussions about the Jedi and their place and everything. The 212th, Kenobi, and Ahsoka would hunt down Crimson Dawn, only to later find Darth Maul at the top of it. They would duke it out with the last of the Sith, and Ahsoka and Obi-Wan would defeat him, ending the legacy of the Sith forever. The Senate would get rid of the role of Chancellor forever. and grow a new power system inside the Republic that would allow for an equal say. The Neutral Systems Coalition, which was formerly led by Duchess Satine of Mandalore, would unite with the CIS and the Republic in establishing a new form of government that everyone could serve with. The clones of the Grand Army of the Republic would also be taken care of in this new governmental system. The Jedi would be left alone, though they would be revoked from having any influence on a government, something that they never really believed they had before Palpatine came along. Regardless of their opinions, the Sith were gone. There could also no longer be a Chancellor, and the clones were able to begin integrating into society. As for Ahsoka, she would rejoin the Jedi Order in memory of her master, and because the Jedi were finally doing what she believed they should have been doing, keeping the peace. On the other hand, Luke and Leia would be returned to the hands of Padme Amidala. The Jedi would help watch over them from time to time, but Padme decided she'd rather raise the children on her own. Lastly, Obi-Wan Kenobi would become the Master of the Order, per request of those around the Jedi Council. This was for Obi-Wan's ability to show strength in the face of adversity of Order 66, to show courage in the death of his student, and to show humility for his ability to serve alongside the clones who tried to execute him. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jonathan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Darth Cheesy, Apollo, Madman Studios, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Flynn Van Cease, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Hit 2,000 likes on this video. I don't know what's coming next, but it is. If you want to see a what if, let me know below, or read all the comments, but I'll do crossovers. Check out the Twitch, community Discord, and Patreon if you want to support me in other ways. Otherwise, let's talk about our story. I don't really have anything else to talk about, no. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed this story a lot. This story was different, fun. I know not everyone likes the concept of Anakin dying in a story, but it allows for something interesting to happen. I thought this was pretty interesting. I hope you thought the same as well, because I got to have fun with this, you know? And I kind of set it up fast, like the first 10 minutes of the video were intentionally set up to be that fast, because I wanted you all to think, and I'm sure most of you did think, that the story was going to end with the Jedi, like, coming back and then, like, killing Palpatine. No, we don't have fun with that. So, one of the dynamics that I thought would be really cool to hyper-focus on during this story is the clones and how they deal with Order 66. But as we've seen in the Bad Batch, we kind of know how that happens. So, dealing with how the clones deal with Order 66 and have to serve with the Jedi after doing it, you know? And so having to see like that reaction from the clones would be really interesting. I think the dynamic between the Jedi Master and the clone, like for example, Obi-Wan and Commander Cody would be completely different. And that's not on Obi-Wan's part, because Obi-Wan wouldn't really look at Cody differently. I feel like Obi-Wan would still, you know, love Cody and care for him like a brother. But I think at that same point, I think Commander Cody would also really struggle to just serve, because you see that in Bad Batch. Sorry for the spoilers. It's been out for like 3 weeks though. And so it's been like out since like 4 weeks. It's been a while since that episode came out. But point being is like, you see that development in Commander Cody, and of course not all the clones are going to feel that way, but not all clones served with Obi-Wan Kenobi. And that's the point. And that's the point I'm trying to make, is like some clones are complete maniacs. Like Bakura, he's a psycho. Like, he's an absolute psycho. Neo, he's a psycho, absolute psycho. They don't care. They don't care about their Jedi. That's fine. But I wanted to talk about the inverse effect of that, like the clones that actually cared about their Jedi generals, the clones that actually had good experiences with those Jedi generals. And so I think that dynamic would be completely shifted, especially if they had to work with them. And so one thing that I know I'm going to get probably criticism on is the Jedi Temple defenses. Okay, I haven't really done this before, and I don't believe it's part of canon. I'm very, very firmly confident that it's not a part of canon. But I wanted to add it in because I thought it'd be interesting, something fun, something different. Again, not every what if is going to sound the most realistic, because what's the title again? What if? It's a what if. It's supposed to be fun. We're supposed to be having fun here. And so the Jedi Temple defenses were like, what if the Jedi were like, what if like after Malgus stormed in and destroyed the temple, what if they were like, yeah, what if we put lightsabers inside the walls of the pillar, so that if like someone tries to attack, we can just like ignite the pillar and then we don't have to worry about it. And so that's what I want to have fun with. Like the Jedi Temple steps, there's a lot of steps going into the temple. So what if there's a riot? You know, you can just turn the steps up and like close them in, and then people that are on the steps fall to their death, you know? It's not very Jedi-like, but it's defending their temple, it's defending their home. And so, you know, having these different attributes for the Jedi Temple to actually defend themselves with was something that I wanted to focus on and be like, well, this would be kind of fun, because you never see that. You never see like you know, I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, you haven't seen that. So I wanted to do that because I thought that'd be fun. Anything else that I really want to talk about? Not really. You know, Palpatine's the main villain all the time, and that's kind of hard to work with because, you know, he's a main villain all the time, and he's a really good villain, so he's really hard to find fallible. And so, you know, always finding a way for him to escape and try and make the best of a situation. And so in this situation, you know, because Sun Kaminoan typed in Anakin Starkiller, this situation was completely, you know, fabricated, and he had to kind of go on a whim. And so I think on a whim, I think his decision would be like, well, the Separatists have a great army. I could use that army to my advantage and try and take back the power. If that doesn't work, then I can leave and recruit Maul and then take it from there. And so that's kind of the further development of the story, if Palpatine even survives Mustafar. But I think he would go to Mustafar and stay there, which would be cool. Because he had that final battle in Mustafar, anyways. So, anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I don't have anything else to say. Hope you all enjoyed. New miniseries coming out soon. I just finished part 2 of 6 for that, so stay tuned for that. Otherwise, I love you all. Spread the love. Always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.